Welcome, everyone, to the new edition of the Multimedia Men Podcast Network. I'm Brian Kluger, and we have such an amazing, fantastic, phenomenal show today. We're going to be talking about the new movie, the new documentary, Skin, A History of Nudity in the Movies, which is basically...
What price do you put on your body, and what are you willing to get naked for?
People are afraid of sex, and maybe they're a little bit afraid of nudity, too.
You were looking awfully close, weren't you?
The world heavyweight champion of documentaries. It is the definitive documentary that should be shown in high schools everywhere. I truly believe that. And we have the filmmakers here, Danny Wolf, Paul Fishbien, and Jim McBride, as you might know him as Mr. Skin and Mr. Man, which is basically the Wikipedia and IMDb version of nudity in motion pictures. It's a must see. But yeah, glad to have you all on the show today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
We are the undisputed champion right now of the definitive documentaries on nudity. So thank you. That is correct.
No, it is correct. I've watched it, and I firmly believe that it should be definitely required viewing for high schools to educate and show just how all of it happened and not to be afraid of it. But first, we'll get into that. I want to start with each of you, starting with Danny. Where did it all begin for you for movies? Was it something you watched when you were little, your parents showed you, a friend showed you? Where did it all begin for you?
It was just going to movies when I was small and going to theaters and seeing anything that was grindhouse or exploitation. I was really into when I was young. So any spider or snake movie, like I would go even by myself to go see matinees. Really in high school, there was a theater on Hollywood Boulevard called the World Theater, and it was 3 movies for $1.50. And all they were was horror and sci-fi. But it was like Humanoids from the Deep, Blood Eaters, and New Year's Evil one week, and next week could be 3 others. And we were there every single Friday night for at least 3 straight years. And that's carried over now to my clubhouse, which is the New Beverly Cinema, Quentin Tarantino's theater. So I still, as Paul does locally living in LA, we have some great rep theaters like the America Cinematheque and the Arrow and the New Beverly. So I still go to the theater. I see everything whenever I can, especially anything that's, exploitive, grindhouse, cheerleader exploitation night, snake exploitation night, whatever it is.
Nunsploitation, one of my favorites.
A couple times, only a couple times. The triple feature, though.
Yeah. Do you remember the first one you saw that sparked your endeavor?
I think Diamonds Are Forever.
Okay.
The early Sean Connery's actually almost last James Bond movie is sort of the first movie I remember going to as a kid. And that was, the rest is mystery.
Excellent. Paul, what about you?
Well, I only remember my parents taking me to 2 movies when I was a kid, starting when I was 5 years old to see Mary Poppins. And while Mary Poppins blew me away, and I would still consider it a favorite film, I loved film, but then what happened to me is when I had a high school journalism teacher in 11th grade, and she was recommending Harold and Maude to the class. And I had no idea what that was. And it played at a cinema called the TLA in Philadelphia. And I went down to the TLA and I saw King of Hearts and Harold and Maude. And Harold and Maude changed my life because I said, I love movies, but I didn't know there were these kinds of movies. It was so, and again, as I was probably 16 years old, it was so subversive and so unique and so warm and funny and created every emotion that you could possibly have watching a movie. And I said that I kind of understood at that point. And then I got to college, I started taking film courses, and the rest is history. So
awesome. And Jim, where did it all begin for you, sir?
Well, my story isn't as nice and pure and wonderful as their stories, but I was a kid that grew up in the 70s with ABC, NBC, and CBS, and all of a sudden in the fall of 1980, when I was a senior in high school, my dad got me a Betamax and cable television, and that convergence of technologies was earth-shattering to me, because now I was able to watch drive-in movies, Italian sex comedies, blaxploitation films, horror movies that I never knew existed. And as a kid that was at that age, I wanted to tape as many nude scenes as I could. So I built a huge collection of tapes of nude scenes. And I turned into the fun guy in the 80s and 90s that if you're at a party or a bar, if you asked me any actress, I knew off the top of my head if they had been nude, how far into the movie. And there was really no use for that. There was no way to earn a living off of that. But then the internet came along, and by accident, I was in a bar in Chicago where I grew up and live, and a guy overheard my friends quizzing me while we were having beers late one night, and he said, "You got to come on my radio show. I think people would be really interested in this." So I left my job at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange to have my 15 minutes of fame with the name Mr. Skin that we came up with to do the shtick on the radio. And I thought it'd be 15 minutes, I'd go back to work. But as it turned out, it became a popular segment in Chicago. And someone heard me on the radio and said, you got to put what's in your head into a website. And I didn't even know what a website was. But lo and behold, I raised a little money, not a lot, and launched MrSkin.com in August 10th of 1999. And here we are 21 years later. And I have to say, I have 40 employees. I love what I do. It's so much fun. And here we are talking about a movie that I'm the executive producer of, on a documentary on nudity in film. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that.
No, it doesn't. And just hearing your story, you must have like a pretty photographic memory if people were always asking you, like, how far into a movie, who's naked in this?
Except when I go to a party and my wife introduces me to someone and 20 minutes later I ask, what's that name of that person again? So it's a very specific photographic memory. Yeah.
I hear you. And so I know, Paul and Danny, you've worked on the Time Warp stuff, and Paul, you've worked with the AVNs and with Jim with Mr. Skin, and Danny, you being a fan and filmmaker of exploitation and all of this stuff. This kind of seems like the perfect storm, this trio, three amigos coming together for this wonderful documentary. How did that come to be?
Well, Danny and I were working on Time Warp, the greatest cult films of all time, which is 3 volumes, all available now on VOD in case anybody's interested. And Jim and I have been friends for years, and we did a couple smaller things together. He hosted a documentary I did for Showtime on the greatest adult stars of all time, and he was the host. And we did a couple things for Playboy TV that kind of used, his greatest scenes. We were looking for something bigger to do, and I was doing this documentary with Danny. And I called Jim and I said, have you ever thought, has anybody thought about doing a documentary on you? And he goes, it's so funny you mentioned that. I'm writing a book and it's my 20th anniversary and blah, blah, blah. So we started to talk about it. And then Jim and I were kind of like, well, maybe we'll do something more serious. We'll leave out the skin, the language, the skin. What do you call those, Jim? Those skin, what do you call those?
Skin finitions? What do you?
Your skin finitions. Okay. So, we'll do something more serious. And then, so Danny and I flew to Chicago to meet with Jim, and I knew Jim and Danny would get along because they both have, a screw loose, and it worked out. They got along, and we sat there on a weekend in Chicago. We really just came together, and then we decided again, with the Me Too movement, sort of hovering over this, and actually having been on set talking to Gina Gershon when we were shooting the cult film doc about the Me Too movement, we thought, what, we have to really deal with this head on. And so that's sort of that context by itself made it has to be something more serious. So that's sort of how it evolved.
That's how it evolved. And Danny, you took over, and did you all three come together to get all these interviews? Because when I say definitive, I've seen documentaries that go off on tangents and don't really cover the subject that they claim to, but this does in such a wonderful chronological order and talks about every aspect you'd want to know.
Yeah, I mean, the three of us and our producer, Christine Augustin, we really, we put a wall together of the movies we needed to cover. the seminal films, the ones you can't leave out. And it was, a big wall of index cards of films. And we obviously didn't want this to be exploited. We wanted it to really be something, as you said, that could be shown in high schools or college cinema courses, a definitive history all the way from the beginning, from the 1880s when film was invented to where we are today. So we want to do something special, informative, that you can learn something and obviously be fun and entertaining. And I think we captured that, but it really, you come up with the movies. What are we going to cover? And we went decade by decade, which seemed to kind of lend itself naturally to do a documentary like this because how things changed over the years, like the production code, the MPAA, censorship. So, you put your movies up like The Last Tango in Paris, we're going to obviously cover. Caligula, we're going to obviously, there's Midnight Cowboy, there's the films. So you put a wall together and then what are the firsts? Like we need to include the first nude scene ever, the first male nude scene, because we do male and female nudity. And then you start plugging in really like who we're going to go interview. And you cast a really wide net. And we, hundreds of names of people we'd like to interview who've done nudity, and not just actors and actresses, but directors and authors and critics and experts. And then you start going after them. And that's kind of the fun part of putting this together is who you can interview. And it's fun to have this wish list and then actually like wouldn't it be amazing if Mariel Hemingway would do an interview and talk about personal best and starting and then like, yes, we have her. And then the day you're interviewing her, it kind of, you really feel that's when it's all coming together. Like we're really getting some great people to give their experiences on the subject. And then here we are today. And I'm just so happy that some of the movies that I've watched over the years that I have unwillingly shown, or that I've shown unwillingly to people, or willingly to people that are unwilling to watch it, such as the 1970s musical porn Alice in Wonderland. I own that, and I've shown that at dinner parties in the background, and it creates some good conversation. I'm glad we covered that. But I'm just curious, when going through something like that, you have to go down such a far, I guess, pun intended, rabbit hole for stuff like that. Is the goal to, I guess, hope for people to watch these things and just showcase kind of what, like, educational, how far it is? And it was great to see kind of the actresses talk about that and where they were in their time and actually enjoy being a part of it. You want to take that, Paul?
Yeah. I'm not sure I understand the question. You mean our intent?
Yeah, well, so like,
films?
Yeah, films like Titanic that has nude scenes,
Yeah.
One of the biggest selling pictures. But my goal, I guess, is to show movies to people that wouldn't necessarily have ever heard of it. And I'm glad that you're showing these things in this documentary.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit about our tendencies, all of us, to not really be in the mainstream as much. Meaning we look for the sort of fringe stuff. We look for the fringe movies. We look for the fringe actors. Because of doing the experience of these two projects, we like giving voice to performers who may have been forgotten or who've had their one thing that happened that they were famous for a short time and they seem sort of lost. And it kind of brings them back. Like Diane Franklin, who, as you know, was the last American hero and last American virgin. And when you saw her in the documentary, you could see how articulate she was. She's out doing press for this, for us. And she was happy to do it because for her, it's like, oh, okay, I'm getting a little bit of my fame back. And she's forgotten and she's terrific and she's smart. And maybe this will help her get some better acting gigs. So I think that's sort of our tendency. Obviously, if we could have gotten Jennifer Lawrence to interview her, we would have, but she turned us down. So,
but there's a cool factor, Brian, I think, in doing these documentaries that if you're into films, whatever the subject matter is, that you never know who's going to pop up next. So to see a Camille Keaton from I Spit on Your Grave, or as you mentioned, or a Ken Davidian from Borat, you're watching a documentary on nudity, you're not going to automatically think Ken Davidian's going to pop up in this documentary. But you know what? He did nudity in a very popular movie, and why shouldn't he be involved in a documentary and has a great story to tell? So there is that. I think it's cool when you're watching this that you just never know, like Christine DeBelle from Alice in Wonderland. I don't think you'd ever expect her to pop up in this documentary, but here she is. So I've had a lot of people tell me like, oh, wow, we can't believe they're so-and-so. We didn't even think of them. Then the obvious of getting a Kathleen Turner or whoever, a Jennifer Lawrence, or, I think we threw in some really cool people that you wouldn't expect to see.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I want to say Alice in Wonderland that you seem to like and show it at dinner parties is an important movie to me. It was kind of on our list because it was about a girl when I was in high school that I took to see it on a first date. So for me, it was a very important film to include for personal reasons.
That's like the best first date ever.
Yeah. I remember the girl. I remember everything that happened that night. I can't remember what I had for breakfast today, but that that night I remember very well.
Did you go on a second date?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, excellent.
Yeah, a few.
And they went to see Pinocchio.
Not necessarily.
So speaking of the cast of people that are interviewing, we could all agree that Malcolm McDowell is a goddamn national treasure and candid and wonderful. So with him being so open and free, is there any uncool uncovered facts that came out during the interviews that you weren't able to put in the movie? Like somebody just got off talking about, it's like, I didn't know that from Hollywood. I didn't know that from the production. So I imagine you have like thousands of hours of footage.
Danny, that thing he was talking about where he was looking at a bird, but they just put in porn? Like, I didn't know about that. Before the documentary or before the interview?
Yeah, I mean, Malcolm McDowell is full of great stories. He's incredible to interview. You're just on the edge of your seat, and he's a great storyteller. I mean, the first cut of skin was about 5.5 hours. Yeah. So yes, it's very painstakingly long to cut stuff out because you're in love with everything in your first cut. You want everything in there, but you can't have a 5.5 hour doc unless it's called Time Warp. So it took a long time, months, to narrow it down. So a lot of good stories, unfortunately, have to come out for time. I mean, one story that I loved, and it was, we didn't include it, and it really doesn't per se have anything to do with nudity, was Muriel Hemingway and Eric Roberts talking about the filming of Star 80 and how the scene of the murder is actually the real room where Dorothy Stratton got murdered. Bob Fosse rented out the actual condo, Dorothy Stratton's condo. So they both told the story how hard and difficult it was to shoot the murder scene in the actual room where she got murdered. It's a condo in Brentwood, California. And strangely enough, Bob Fosse demanded that Muriel Hemingway and Eric Roberts spend the night in that room and sleep there the night before they were going to shoot the murder scene. And Muriel Hemingway split. She's like, I'm not doing this. It's not in my contract. No way. Eric Roberts did and couldn't sleep and said he was yelling from the bedroom, this is ridiculous. Can I come out? I can't sleep in here. And Bob Fosse was sleeping in the living room and kept telling Eric Roberts to shut up and go to sleep. So I just thought it's such a great movie, but a lot of people don't know, and we took it out of the doc, that scene of that murder is the actual real bedroom where the murder took place.
That's method.
That's as method as you can get, man.
Yeah.
Paul, what about you? Is there anything you remember?
Yeah, well, there were, I don't think that, everybody was talking on the record, so it's not that we couldn't put stuff in. There was more discussion from a couple of the actresses about abusive tactics. And when you start to go down that rabbit hole, it's a whole different documentary. So not that we were trying to hide anybody's position. We didn't care about that, but it was like, yeah, you can include a little bit of that, but if you start to go down that rabbit hole, all of a sudden it's a different movie, and then you have to really start dealing with it. So that's probably another documentary that we'll do at some point. But other than that, I mean, we took a few of the stories that got cut out and we put them over the end credits, because that story that Malcolm McDowell tells about the set of Caligula with John Gielgud is just fantastic. But there was like, for example, Erica Gavin's story which we thought was very important about, you know, her seeing herself naked on the screen for the first time. That's like a 10-minute story. So it took about 2 weeks to edit that down to a soundbite that was workable. So, you know, it's hard to do that, because if you just let it go, I'm telling you, we were down more tangents than we could even handle. So, you know.
I like that. And another interview that really stuck out to me because of her way of being unfiltered is Sean Young.
Yeah.
Oh my, I just love her. And what was it like with you three? I mean, to talk with her, hear her stories, her point of view, and all of that. And I'm sure you were like, oh, like we got gold here.
Well, we interviewed her in Time Warp
Twice.
for Blade Runner.
Twice, yeah.
Yeah, we interviewed her in our last documentary about Blade Runner, and she is, correct, Brian, unfiltered, and that's what makes her a great interview, is she's out there. So you know you're going to get some interesting comments. So when we approached her to do this interview about No Way Out, she said yes, which we were lucky to go to New York and interview her. And you're right, it's the people you really want to interview are those that are unfiltered, that don't really want to hold back, and she doesn't care. And that is sort of her reputation, you know, around. But we love Sean Young, and we're glad she's in the documentary, and her stories about No Way Out and the filming with Kevin Costner are good. So, yeah, she's great.
I do want to say something about Sean Young. Despite her reputation, she was lovely with us both times.
Absolutely.
Easy, on time, sweet, smart. So whatever was going on with those stories in her life, we didn't see any of that, you know. So I just want to say that. I want to be on the
She didn't
record
come
with that.
dressed as Catwoman to the interview. She didn't do that. So we appreciated that.
Right. And I just love that she's done so much in the history of nudity, and even a little bit doing, like, you know, transgender almost in a funny way in Ace Ventura. I think they cast her for a reason.
Yeah, exactly.
She's doing it. So with Skin, A History of Nudity in the movies, how extensive is the research? I'm sure, Jim, you came in perfectly for this to help out with research. And where can we start? Where do we go? What do we leave out? What do we put in? What has to put in? What was the research like, and how long did that take?
Well, I thought it was definitely a group effort. I mean, Danny and Paul, you have to understand, you know, did the lion's share of the actual work. But one of the great things about this, and listen, from the beginning, I knew there had never been a documentary on this subject. I'd always wanted to do something, not necessarily a documentary, but something in regards to this. But it wasn't until I was able to partner with Paul and he was able to get Danny. And I had some writers that had worked for me that were very helpful in this, because it really isn't something any one person could put together. You need a lot of help to kind of capture the history of nudity in movies, because I'll tell you, there was even stuff, you know, I like to think I know everything when it comes to this subject, but you'll know, anyone who watches this movie, when you look at the pre-Hays Code stuff and what was going on with Audrey Munson in 1915, or Clara Bow and Wings, or, you know, even Hedy Lamarr in Ecstasy, I think people that watch this documentary, number one, those nude scenes are going to seem like, I can't believe this existed, but also just the debauchery of like what was going on in movies in the silent film era and up until the early 30s before the Hays Code kicked in. It's a cool part of the documentary, and obviously that's the early part. But I think a lot of people are going to be shocked at what was going on in movies prior to 1934.
Right. And so here's a you know, not like a political question, but something similar. What do you think scares people about Skin, the exposure of Skin, rather than hardcore violence on movies? So I know you interviewed a lot of scholars for this film. What was their take? What's your take on why people would be more inclined not to see something because they're scared or they think it's wrong, more or less seeing something of people getting shot in the head?
I can take this if you guys want. My politics are very much entrenched with First Amendment rights, because I ran AVN. I started AVN and I ran it for almost 30 years, which was the definitive trade publication for the adult video industry. And I was around when people were being raided by the government and put on trial for selling movies by consenting adults to consenting adults, and saw friends, people I did business with, actually go to jail for obscenity. So I'm very entrenched in that world. And there was always this argument from the porn industry. I think it was something like, you can cut off a woman's breast and it gets an R, but if you show someone getting a breast kissed, it's obscene. And that's exactly the point. It's like sex is dirty and violence is okay, and we're going to go after people who are performing consenting sex or nudity in this case, but we're going to allow all this horrible violence on screen. There should be no censorship. There should be parental guidance and parental control. There should be, age restrictions and all of that stuff. And so, when we do something as benign as simple nudity, it's fascinating that the Catholic League in the 30s went insane and forced the studios to create this production code, because they were going to shut down Hollywood for the simple showing of a breast. And it's ridiculous. And I think the Europeans, as pointed out in our movie, they laughed at us, and they still laugh at us, and they're laughing at us for other reasons now too. But we're a very puritanical society. As violent as we are, and as gun-toting a society as we are, we have issues with sex, and we have issues with nudity, which is insane.
And I wonder what the psyche behind that is. It's as if so many generations passed down that it's morally wrong, but we all do it,
Well, we're one nation under God.
Yeah.
Once you put God into politics and government, people grow up. I don't want to get into that, because, I'll lose fans. So we'll lose rentals on the Skin Doc. We need people to go to Amazon and iTunes tomorrow and rent it.
Well, that's why I like the documentary, because it shows that side of, like you said, the European side of like, it's, there's nude beaches, there's nude commercials. And then here in the US, like everything's frowned upon nudity wise, but you can show the most horrific violence, like in Blood Feast, and it be okay.
I think Jim can answer this better. Jim, do you agree with me that it's television that sort of helped open things up a little bit, and that maybe new movies have gotten a little more conservative and television's gotten crazy with the nudity?
Yeah, for sure. Brian, when I launched Mr. Skin in '99, there were 19 television shows that had, some of them had nudity, some of them had bikinis and underwear, but there were 19. In 2009, there were 29. In 2019, when Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, all these stations doing original programming, there were 144 different television shows where we had nudity, that we were able to get nudity for our website. And the thing too is, it's not just female nudity. Male nudes is pretty close to that too. I think it was neck and neck, 144 to 142 when we did that survey in 2019. We are in the golden age of celebrity nudity. It's just more from television. And think of this, in the 1990s, if you watched a great television show, it wouldn't have nudity in it. It didn't exist. Maybe Sex in the City late in the decade. The Sopranos started in 99, but you didn't expect to see nudity in a great TV show. Now, any great television show has nudity. It's just part of the thing. I mean, it doesn't matter, whether it's HBO, Netflix, whatever. If you see a great nude scene, you're not shocked anymore. So I really think we're in the golden age of celebrity nudity, but it's because of television, not because of movies.
Yeah, I didn't hear anyone complaining about nudity in Game of Thrones.
No.
Like that never, ever, ever came up by anybody.
Right.
And that's a good point, because, people that I went to school with would never like something like Game of Thrones, be with dragons and elves and all the monsters. But then all of a sudden, the cool people in quotations started liking this stuff, and with all the violence and nudity, I was, where did this come from?
Right.
So it's something interesting there.
And I think it's what's reflective in feature films is that it's not as big a deal now, and we're kind of educating part of the public that rarely goes to the movies because everybody watches TV. You know, everyone's watching TV, but not everybody goes to the theater. Well, nobody's going now, but under normal times. And I think that you're going to sort of see the audience, not the conservative people who hate it no matter what, but you're kind of teaching an audience of media watchers that it's kind of normal. And so I think it's not as big a deal if someone sheds their clothes in a feature film anymore. I think it's more like, is it inherent in the plot or the character development, more so than for the exploitative reasons.
Right. Let's talk about, so this film, for film buffs and film fans and students, draws a lot of similarities to older films, which I'm glad you showcase in this documentary, Skin. So something like the movie Women in Love that has the male fight scene, which is, you know, brought to my attention, like Eastern Promises with the male fight scene in there too. Was there something that during your research and making the documentary that you did not know about that you saw later in a film, but then you're like, oh, this was the inspiration to this long ago? Because I know you're all like cinephiles here, but something like in that realm, like, oh, that one.
So something that we saw that later you go, oh, they were influenced by ecstasy.
Correct.
That's a good question.
Well, I'll tell you why it's hard to be specific, because so much of cinema from the 30s and 40s on to present is influenced by things people saw in early cinema, you know? So you'll see, you know, like you'll see a shot that some director makes today and you go, oh, you know, he's influenced by, you know, Citizen Kane and Orson Welles and Citizen Kane. In terms of how nudity is shown, I can't think of anything specific. Can you, Danny?
I kind of think to each genre, how it's shown in the context of genres. Yeah. So like in a women in prison film, you have to have nudity because there's shower scenes. And in the showers in women's prisons, they don't wear clothes. And then you go to the level of, well, these movies are exploitive, but these movies don't get distribution without the nudity. And we covered that a bit with Pam Grier talks about it, and I know Sybil Danning does, and Martha Coolidge even, where a lot of these scenes in nudity are put in because of distribution. And if they don't have a certain number of nude scenes often, they won't get distribution, especially internationally. So that was what I found that very fascinating, especially the story of Valley Girl, where Martha Coolidge, and I won't spoil it because I want people to hear her say it, of how the requirement of nudity and how many nude scenes often in scripts was very important. They're just not thrown in there all the time to be gratuitous, that there is a bigger strategy amongst putting these scenes in there. And we covered that, which is kind of interesting. Yeah,
you wonder why, you know, you think, why were there so many nude scenes in teen sex comedies from between 1980 and 1985? Yeah. And when you hear the director talk, you understand that, not because the director necessarily wanted to do it, because they were required to do it. You know, it's if they wanted to get the film made and make money, they had to do a certain amount of nude scenes. It's just the way it was. Obviously, that changed when John Hughes came around. But anyway, it was very interesting to hear about that in that 1980 to 1985 range.
That was cool. And I gotta give props to the editing department here because it's so well edited, especially the Julie Andrews segment where the reveal and all the applause, because I did the same thing out loud. I was like, yes, you stand up and applaud for Julie. And did y'all try to get her in on the doc?
Did we, Danny? Is she on this wall that I'm still looking at? Here, do you want to see this wall, Brian?
I don't.
This is the actual wall.
Oh my!
where, here, let me stand up. These cards, this is the layout and the design for the skin dock.
Oh
And
my.
it's not coming down till we launch our next dock.
Okay.
And when we do, we'll take it all down and we'll have a new wall. But Julie Andrews she's not on this wall, but I think we thought, no way. Because Danny called Barbara Streisand's agent and she said no. But I thought that was funny that Danny actually called Barbara Streisand's agent.
You cast the widest net. I mean, Kathy Bates. I would have loved to interview Kathy Bates for About Schmidt. Because when that movie came out, everyone talked about, oh, Kathy Bates has done Nudity at her age. And I thought that was very important. And we do include it in the documentary. She would have been cool to interview. But, I mean, you go after everyone. Kathleen Turner, we were very close to getting. Teresa Russell, I can name other names. But I think we're all very happy with who we got.
And by the way, I do appreciate your shout out to the editing department because Steve Austin, our editor, he
Stone Cold.
Yeah, Stone Cold.
He was before Stone Cold. He was before the $1 Million Man. Whatever. He was so excited because we were reviewed in the Hollywood Reporter last week, and he said to me, "I can die now." Something I worked on was reviewing the Hollywood Reporter. I mean, he takes it seriously. He's another film buff. I grew up with him, and we saw a lot of movies together. And he's extremely creative and extremely disorganized, but extremely creative.
That's funny.
So as long as Danny organizes him, we're in good shape.
You guys mentioned Barbara Streisand. If you would have got her, I would have had to dust off my Japanese laser disc of The Owl and the Pussycat. The only time she was ever topless is in the Japanese laser disc of The Owl and the Pussycat. So, yeah,
we knew that.
That would have been in the documentary.
And we knew you had it. We knew you had it. So
I can't understand the thing they're saying, but that scene's in there.
Exactly.
That is awesome. All right, here's a fun question for you, for all of you, and we'll start with you, Jim. What is the most thrilling movie experience, both as a fan and as, a filmmaker and purveyor of your site?
Well, I think it's early stuff. I got to tell you, when I first got cable TV and the Betamax, I wasn't in a theater, obviously. I was in my home. But imagine waking up one morning, and I had taped Bobby Joe and the Outlaw, a 1976 drive-in movie. And I start fast-forwarding, and I stop because Linda Carter, Wonder Woman, has 4 topless scenes in the first 33 minutes of the movie. And I remember this. I thought to myself, if Linda Carter has been nude, who else is out? Who else has done nudity? And I've been on a quest ever since. So I think that thing you discover early as a kid sometimes lasts, obviously it lasts a long time, but it's so powerful. And that experience for me was really cool. I have a lot of others, but that one stands out.
And then as a filmmaker as well, or purveyor of this Mr. Skin, is there like a thrilling moment that you got to be part of?
This will be a weird one, but I remember I was watching the first season of True Detective on HBO with my wife. And now I had been doing Mr. Skin for 16 years or so, whatever. And I remember Alexander Daddario had that sex scene with Woody Harrelson. And I turned to this was in January, and I turned to my wife and said, "That's going to be the best nude scene of the year." And it was January. But I also the thing that was good for me is, like, people ask me all the time, "Are you jaded? Do you like not care about nude scenes anymore?" But what that made me realize is I was just excited to see that, or just like the beauty of it. I was in awe of the scene, as I would have been when I was that kid that liked Linda Carter and Bobby Joe and the Outlaw. So that made me feel good that I'm not jaded. I still love this stuff, and I'm still a fan.
I like that. All right. What about you, Danny? But like most thrilling movie making experience and a movie as a fan?
Well, most thrilling to me because I love audience participation. And it's funny, I've seen Rocky Horror several times at midnight here, which still plays, and I don't like the movie, and I don't like going to see acted out. But to me, like, again, hanging out at Quentin Tarantino's theater, it's always audience participation. Everyone's yelling at the screen. Every Charles Bronson movie, from Kinjite to Death Wish 5, those are thrilling experiences for me. I went to the only Showgirls live performance acted out in LA they ever did. They did one. And because I was such a fan of the movie Showgirls, I think it's a masterpiece that I went to the only like Rocky horror performance of Showgirls where they acted the entire movie out in front of the screen. Hedwig and the Angry Inch, which I think is an amazing movie, extremely underrated film. They were doing midnight shows every week in LA for 2 years at midnight. Often it would start at 2 a.m. because they were doing skits and contests. And I found myself like twice a month going to see Hedwig and the Angry Inch acted out completely live with a live band in front of the screen doing the entire soundtrack. So I don't know if that skews off a little bit what you asked, but the thrilling movie experiences for me are the ones where, you know, you stand in line for 2 hours to get in with like-minded fans of the same film, and everyone's in there like it's like a clubhouse. I like when a theater's turned into a clubhouse and everyone's there for one reason. And going to, you know, America's Cinematheque or the New Beverly Cinema, everybody in line are cinephiles. They all talk about movies before you get in, and then everyone respects the film. No one has their phone on. No one talks. People are yelling out lines that they should be yelling out. So I just like that experience. I love the going to theaters as much as I can, but going with fans that are hardcore and appreciate what they're seeing. And if there's a live performance of the movie, that's a bonus.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. Well, what about you, Paul?
Well, I explained, I guess I already mentioned that just seeing Harold and Maude changed my life. I'm different than Danny. If I go see a film that moves me in a way or surprises me in a way, or I feel like this is the best thing I've seen this year, to me, that's just a rewarding thing, and it sticks with me. So for me, I mean, if I think back, you know, obviously Harold and Maude changed the way I viewed movies. And then I think I had a film course in college where the teacher showed Chinatown, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, 3 Preston Sturges movies, 2 Buster Keaton movies, some other crazy stuff. And I was like, this is film course. This is film school. And I'm seeing Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. And just kind of saying to myself, God, there's so many different great kinds of movies. And then, of course, I met Russ Meyer and became friends with him. So that's just a whole different part of the story. Because Beyond the Valley of the Dolls sticks with me. But it was just sort of that experience that film can change your life every time you go. In terms of a filmmaking personal story, it was just a thrill for me to meet John Cleese, and Danny interviewed him. I was going to interview him, but Danny had done 100% of the interviews. And when we got to the place to do the interview, Danny's like, let me handle it, you know, because he thought I was going to, you know, I probably would have been a geek fan. So just meeting John Cleese, that was sort of the highlight of this whole making these documentaries. So
Awesome.
And meeting Mr. Skin. Obviously.
Right. No, of course. No, I'm in awe.
And meeting Gina Gershon.
Oh, yes.
That too.
Gina Gershon.
And getting to talk about Killer Joe. Which
so
the drumstick. Yeah.
So
unbelievable.
It is so good. I saw the premiere of that in Texas because it was based off a Texas Magazine article.
Oh, Killer Joe.
Yeah, and Gina Gershon out of nowhere, and they said like how Reese Witherspoon was originally for that role, but she didn't want to do the first nude scene with, you know, full frontal, but the jump stick was fine. But Gina Gershon, legendary. My goodness, that movie's good.
Yeah,
she's also very underrated.
She is
very underrated, underappreciated.
Oh, it was great. So recently I did feature an article on the most surprising nudity and sex scenes in cinema. And I'm curious on or some of your most surprising ones. So like mine would be like A Clockwork Orange, specifically the sequence of the William Tell Overture orgy, because it's the only full-length consensual sex in the movie, and it happens on a whim at a music store to the William Tell overture. And it's just like, oh, that's surprising. And, you know, along with maybe Pink Flamingos or Team America or even Eyes Wide Shut. But what are some of your most surprising scenes of nudity or sex scenes that are just like, oh, surprise?
Well, we have an expert. We should go with him.
Well, I don't know if his angle and my angle are the same. I look at it, I'm asked a lot, what is the most, who are you most surprised? Who would we be surprised did a nude scene? That's always a big question. So if I could answer that, I got to say, Marcia from the Brady Bunch, Maureen McCormick, did an obscure movie in 1981 called Texas Lightning, where at the hour and 4 minute mark, she's topless, which the fact that it's Marcia Brady, the fact that was her only nude scene, the fact that it even happened blows people's mind. Another one is Molly Ringwald. I don't think, she was in all those John Hughes movies and, was the good girl. She did a movie in 1995 called Malicious, where 15 minutes in, she's on top of a guy and she's topless. And I think those are an example. And Julie Andrews, we brought up, she was Mary Poppins and she's in the documentary. Yeah. Those are three that come to mind as surprising from the standpoint of you would be surprised that they did nude scenes.
Oh, wow. That brings a whole nother level of topic to my head. Yeah. Who would be the most? And my mind went to the woman who played Gilbert Grape's mother. I was like, has she done a nude scene? Something like that.
For me, I think what was most surprising when I first saw it was the Basic Instinct scene with Sharon Stone, because never before had a major, beautiful A-list star shown that. And you're in the theater and you go, wait, what? Did I just see that? And you just have to either see the movie again or wait for at the time, I guess, a VHS release to see it. But for me, it's Julianne Moore in Shortcuts because of the matter-of-factness of that. And because I love redheads, that was a scene that will always live in infamy, with her just walking around bottomless. And when I had the VHS tape of Shortcuts, I have to admit that I never rewound it past that scene. So just letting everybody know that. So I do have a little of that Mr. Skin-ness in me. So I think Julianne Moore and Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct, those are to me the two surprising sex scenes when I first saw them.
All right.
I mean, not sex scenes, nude scenes.
I brought up Kathy Bates earlier. So Jim, how did the Kathy Bates scene rank?
Yeah.
Because that was such a surprise because you didn't expect.
Well, Kathy had done it. She actually had done a nude scene in that Play in the Fields of the Lord many years before. So it wasn't her first nude scene, but the fact that it was in a mainstream Hollywood film and what she showed, it definitely puts it up there as one of the more surprising nude scenes. I think, to me, if we're going to go that way, where people you wouldn't expect, maybe because they aren't, quote, what you would consider attractive, would be Jessica Tandy in Camellia when she was 84 years old in a 1994 movie, Camellia, where she goes for a skinny dip. And I think that didn't make it's not in the documentary, but that's an example of, you don't expect an 84-year-old famous actress to get completely nude and go for a skinny dip, but she did.
It's great too.
Oh, that's why I love you, Jim. You just have this knowledge that is just like right off the top of my head and how far into it. That's great. Yeah. That is wonderful. And so, to kind of wrap this up, what are your hopes and dreams for this documentary? Do you want it I said I wanted it in all schools. I want this part of the Criterion Collection. I want this to be part of it. What are the hopes that you hope that people take away from this amazing film?
What it's kind of, I'll give a quick answer for it. It's what's already happening in a lot of the reviews is that people are learning a lot, and it's educational. And yes, this should be shown in college film cinema courses all over the country. Absolutely, because it isn't just about, you're not just going to see nudity and nude scenes. It really is a thorough history of cinema and nudity within cinema, again, from the 1880s to today. So, it's gratifying when you talk to critics and reviewers and you're reading that they're learning a lot that they never knew. And they're film scholars that are writing and reviewers saying, wow, I didn't even know this about the film, The Pre-Code, and the Pre-Code films, and The Code, and Joseph Bream and Will Hayes, and that period of time. So it's, to me, I like that people are getting an education in cinema and the history of film, in addition to all the great nudity. And it's really entertaining and fun, and it's very fast-paced. But I like that people are, they're learning a lot, and stuff that they think they know everything about Hollywood, and they're learning a whole nother side that they never knew from our documentary.
All right. Awesome. And my last fun question for all of you, is there anyone that has not had a nude scene in a film or TV show that you want to see nude?
Let's give it to Jim.
Well, I think there's two in my life. Raquel Welch is probably the biggest name that should have done a nude scene, especially the era that she was famous. How she didn't do a true nude scene is beyond me. Modern day Christina Hendricks, the office manager from Mad Men, needs to do a nude scene. But there's, obviously there's a lot, but those are two that come to mind.
You were talking about the hopes and dreams. And I'd like to say that my hopes and dreams are that everybody goes and rents this thing on Amazon and iTunes and Fandango, and so we can recoup the money. That's my hope and dream. I'll let Danny have the last word on that. On, who hasn't done a sex scene? Isla Fisher for me. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, it's funny. I was thinking of Isla Fisher.
Yeah.
And she's a redhead, and Paul already mentioned her.
Yeah.
I guess, Jim, Raquel Welch I'm thinking of The Last of Sheila, but I believe her and Diane Cannon were just in bikinis.
Right. She came close a lot. She even did a made for TV movie in 1989 called Trouble in Paradise, where the good news is she takes her top off. The bad news is her back is to the camera. But for some reason, she just, even in my Breckenridge, she never was nude. But lots of bikinis, lots of sexy moments. She was obviously stunning and gorgeous, but never did an official nude scene.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me on the show today. This was a lot of fun. Paul, you want to tell everybody again where they can find this?
Sure, I seem to be the one pushing it. It's available on demand wherever you rent movies. So if you have DirecTV, you can rent it. If you have Spectrum cable, you might not be able to find it, but it's there. You have to type it in. But when you go to Amazon or iTunes or any of those places, just make sure.
Apple TV, yeah.
Yeah, well, Apple TV and iTunes are the same, pretty much. But it's Skin, A History of Nudity in the Movies, right? Because if you just type in Skin, you're going to find a couple films from like 2019 and 2017. And, the title was too good, our distributor. I said to our distributor, there's other titles called Skin. Do you want to change it? And our distributor said, absolutely not. We like it. So you got to go with the distributor, Quiver Distribution.
Yeah.
So.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you
for having us.